Welcome to Dark Seduction Stories, a world where shadows hold secrets and forbidden desires ignite in the darkness. Each story here will pull you into atmospheric tales of dangerous love, powerful obsessions, and the kind of romance that changes everything. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. If you crave more dark, immersive romance that lingers long after the final word, subscribe and join us in the shadows. The December wind cut through my wool coat like a blade as I stood outside the Café Central, clutching my violin case against my chest. My fingers were already numb despite my gloves, and I'd been waiting for nearly 20 minutes, checking my phone every few seconds. The message had been clear: meet at 4 o'clock. Someone would collect me. It was now 4:17, and the winter darkness was already settling over Vienna's streets, the Christmas lights beginning to glow against the twilight. I was about to give up, to trudge back to the hostel where I'd spent last night on a borrowed bed, when a black Mercedes pulled to the curb. The rear window lowered, and a woman's face appeared, elegant and composed, despite the cold. "Kateřina Novakova?" she asked in German, though my name rolled off her tongue with perfect Czech pronunciation. "Yes," I replied, my breath clouding in the freezing air. "I apologize for the delay. Traffic from the airport. Please, get in." I hesitated only a moment before opening the door and sliding into the warm interior, my violin case balanced carefully on my lap. The woman was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I earned in 6 months of teaching beginner students in Prague. Her eyes were kind but assessing as they swept over me, taking in my worn coat, my practical boots, the case I held like a lifeline. "I'm Helena," she said as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "I manage Mr. Kováč's household and estates. You had a pleasant journey from Prague?" "Yes, thank you." The train had been cheap but crowded, and I'd spent most of the 3-hour journey reviewing the pieces I'd been asked to prepare, my fingers moving unconsciously through the positions, even without my violin in hand. "Mr. Kováč is very particular about music," Helena continued, her gaze returning to the window. "He attends perhaps 3 concerts a year, all private performances. When his usual musician became unavailable, your name was recommended by someone he trusts." I wanted to ask who had recommended me, but something in Helena's tone suggested questions weren't welcome. Instead, I asked, "How long will the performance last?" "An hour, perhaps slightly more. Mr. Kováč will indicate when he's satisfied." She glanced at me. "The fee we discussed is acceptable. 5,000 euros. 5,000 euros. More than I made in 3 months. More than enough to cover Tomáš's next round of treatments, to buy us another few months of hope." I swallowed hard. "Yes, very acceptable." "Good." Helena's expression softened slightly. "You're very young. 23, according to your file." My file. Of course they'd investigated me. 24 next month, I said quietly, and already quite accomplished. First violin in the Prague Chamber Orchestra until 6 months ago. Scholarship to the conservatory. Winner of the Dvořák competition at 19. She tilted her head. "Why did you leave the orchestra?" The question I'd been dreading. "Family circumstances," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "My brother needed me." Helena nodded as if this explained everything, and perhaps it did. Family was family. The car had left the city centre, heading toward the Vienna woods, the road climbing steadily. Through the window, I glimpsed estates set back behind gates and hedges, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. After 20 minutes, we turned through iron gates that opened automatically, proceeding up a long drive lined with bare trees. The house that emerged from the darkness took my breath away. Not a house at all, really, but a small schloss, a castle rendered in pale stone with towers at each corner and windows that glowed with warm light. It looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and slightly ominous in equal measure. "The Kováč estate," Helena said unnecessarily. "It's been in his family for 4 generations." I followed her through massive wooden doors into an entrance hall that soared 3 stories high, a crystal chandelier casting prismatic light across marble floors. Artwork lined the walls, paintings I recognized even from a distance as significant, valuable. A Klimt sketch, what might have been a Sheila, several pieces I couldn't identify, but that radiated the kind of presence only genuine masterworks possessed. "This way," Helena said, leading me through a corridor to a smaller room, still elegantly appointed, but more intimate. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and a table held coffee, tea, and delicate pastries. "You have 30 minutes to prepare. The performance will be in the music room. I'll collect you when Mr. Kovács is ready." She left me alone, and I set down my violin case with trembling hands. The room's warmth was making my frozen fingers ache as feeling returned to them. I poured coffee from a silver pot, added sugar, and wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat penetrate my skin. Through the window, I could see gardens stretching into darkness, sculptures rising like ghosts from carefully manicured beds. I thought of Tomáš in the hospital in Prague, his face pale against the white pillow, his smile weak but determined. "Don't worry about me, Katka," he'd said last week. "I'm tough." But he wasn't tough. He was 19 and fighting leukemia, and our parents were 7 years dead, and I was all he had. 5,000 euros would pay for the experimental treatment his doctors had mentioned, the one not covered by insurance, the one that might actually save his life. I opened my violin case, checking that the journey hadn't affected the instrument. It was a beautiful thing, over 200 years old, left to me by my father. He'd been a violinist too, though not a particularly successful one, teaching students and playing in regional orchestras. But he'd loved this violin. And on his deathbed, he'd pressed the case into my hands. "This is worth more than you know, Katka," he'd whispered. "Not in money, though it's valuable enough. In what it can do, in what it carries." I'd never understood what he meant, but I'd cherished it anyway, learning its moods and quirks, the way certain notes sang more sweetly than others, the subtle adjustments needed to draw out its full voice. I resined my bow, tuned the strings, played a few scales to warm up my fingers and check the acoustics. The room was excellent, the sound carrying cleanly without excessive echo. A soft knock announced Helena's return. "Mr. Kovács is ready for you now." I followed her deeper into the house, my violin case in hand, my heart beating faster with each step. We passed through corridors lined with more artwork, through rooms glimpsed briefly in passing that spoke of old wealth and refined taste. Finally, Helena opened a set of double doors, and I stepped into the music room. It was magnificent. High ceilings painted with murals of angels and instruments, walls panelled in dark wood, acoustics that I could tell even before playing would be perfect. A grand piano sat in one corner, its surface gleaming. And in the centre of the room, facing away from me toward floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the dark gardens, sat a man in a leather chair. "Mr. Kovács," Helena said quietly. "Miss Novakova has arrived." He didn't turn immediately, and I had the impression of broad shoulders in a dark sweater, dark hair slightly too long, one hand holding a glass of what looked like whiskey. Then he stood and turned, and my breath caught. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 35, with sharp features that weren't quite handsome but were compelling in their intensity. Dark eyes under straight brows, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, a jawline shadowed with stubble. There was something predatory in the way he moved, in the way his gaze travelled over me with frank assessment. "Miss Novakova," he said, and his voice was low, accented with Hungarian beneath the German. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Thank you for the opportunity, Herr Kovács." I was pleased my voice came out steady. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne, mixed with something else, leather and wood smoke perhaps. "Please, call me Viktor. Herr Kovács was my father." His eyes dropped to my violin case. "Is that the Guarnerius?" I blinked, surprised. Most people couldn't identify a violins maker just by seeing the case. "Yes." "How did you—" "I make it my business to know about beautiful things." His gaze returned to my face, holding perhaps a beat too long. "And valuable ones." Something in his tone made my skin prickle with awareness, though I couldn't have said why. I knelt and opened the case, lifting out the violin with the reverent care it deserved. When I looked up, Victor's expression had changed. something almost hungry in his eyes as he looked at the instrument. "May I?" he asked, extending a hand. I hesitated. I never let anyone else handle my violin, never. But something in his face, in the way he asked rather than demanded, made me carefully place it in his hands. He held it with surprising gentleness, turning it to examine the wood grain, the varnish, the precise curve of the F-holes. His fingers traced the scroll with something like reverence. "Magnificent," he murmured. 1742, if I'm not mistaken. The Del Gesù period, when Guarnerius was at his peak. He looked at me. "Do you know its provenance?" "It was my father's. His father's before that." "I don't know much before that." Something flickered in his eyes. "No, that's interesting." He handed the violin back to me. "Please play. I'd like to hear the Bach chaconne first." I took my position, raising the violin to my shoulder, feeling its familiar weight settle against my collarbone. I closed my eyes briefly, finding my center, then drew the bow across the strings. The opening notes of the chaconne filled the room, that solemn, processional theme that always felt like a prayer. I'd played this piece hundreds of times, but never in acoustics like these. Never with such a sense that every note mattered, that something more than music was at stake. I played the first variation, the notes cascading and interweaving, my fingers finding their positions with the muscle memory of years of practice. The violin sang beneath my hands, its voice rich and resonant in the perfect acoustic space. I'd forgotten about Viktor, about the strange circumstances that had brought me here, about everything except the music and the conversation between composer and instrument and performer that happened in those moments when everything aligned. When I reached the final bars and drew out the last note, letting it fade into silence, I slowly lowered my bow. My eyes opened, and I found Viktor standing much closer than before, perhaps 10 feet away, his expression intense and unreadable. "Extraordinary," he said quietly. "Your father taught you." "Until I was 12, then the conservatory. He must have been very proud. He died before I graduated." The old pain flickered but didn't overwhelm. 7 years was long enough to learn to live with loss, though never long enough to stop missing them. Viktor nodded slowly. "I lost my father 6 years ago. The grief becomes manageable, but it never truly leaves." He gestured to a different chair, angled so I'd face him rather than the windows. "Please sit. The Brahms sonata next, if you would." I settled into the chair, adjusting my position, and launched into the sweeping melody of Brahms. This was a piece that demanded everything from a performer: technical brilliance and emotional depth and perfect control. I lost myself in it, in the conversation between piano and violin, even though the piano part was only in my head. Phantom notes my ears filled in from memory. Halfway through the second movement, I became aware again of Viktor's gaze on me. Not on the violin, not on my technique, but on my face, watching with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't, quite. It was more like being seen, really seen, for the first time in months, since I'd left the orchestra, since I'd devoted myself entirely to Tomáš's care and survival. I'd felt invisible, a ghost moving through my own life. Viktor's attention made me feel substantial again, present, real. I finished the piece and lowered my violin, breathing a bit hard from the exertion. Viktor said nothing for a long moment, just watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You're even better than I was led to believe," he said finally. "The technique is flawless, but that's not what makes you exceptional. It's the emotion, the way you inhabit the music rather than simply performing it." "Thank you." I wasn't sure what else to say. He stood abruptly, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters gleamed. "Would you like something to drink? Wine? Something stronger? Water, please." He poured water for me and refreshed his whiskey, returning to hand me a crystal glass. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, and I felt an electric jolt of awareness that I immediately tried to suppress. This was a job, nothing more. A very well-paying job I desperately needed. "Tell me about your brother," Viktor said, settling back into his chair. I nearly dropped my glass. "How do you—" "I investigate anyone who enters my home," he said simply. "Tomáš, 19, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, 8 months ago. He's responding to treatment, but not as well as hoped. You left the Prague Chamber Orchestra to care for him, burning through your savings to supplement what insurance doesn't cover. Anger flared hot in my chest. You had no right. I have every right, he interrupted, his tone still calm. I protect what's mine, and that requires information. His eyes held mine. But I'm not judging you, Kateřina. I'm trying to understand you. Why? The question came out sharper than intended. Something like a smile touched his lips. Because I'm about to make you an offer, and I need to know if you'll accept it. My heart hammered against my ribs. The performance was a test, one you passed brilliantly. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, glass dangling from his fingers. I don't need a violinist for an hour, Kateřina. I need one for 3 months, possibly longer. I don't understand. I collect art, he said. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, beautiful things with history and provenance. And occasionally, I acquire pieces through unconventional means. The implication hung in the air between us. Stolen art, black market antiquities, the kind of collecting that involved more than auction houses and legitimate dealers. Recently, he continued, I've become interested in acquiring several pieces currently in private collections in Prague, Budapest, and Vienna. Pieces whose owners are reluctant to sell. To facilitate these acquisitions, I need to infiltrate certain social circles, attend certain gatherings where these collectors congregate. His eyes never left my face. I need a companion who can blend into these environments, who has legitimate artistic credentials, who speaks Czech, German, and Hungarian fluently. Someone whose presence beside me wouldn't raise suspicions. You want me to help you steal art, I said flatly. I want you to accompany me to social events. What happens during or after those events is my concern, not yours. He took a sip of whiskey. In exchange, I'll pay you 50,000 euros for 3 months of your time, plus expenses, wardrobe, accommodations. And I'll arrange for your brother to receive treatment at the Krankenhaus der Barmherzigen Brüder here in Vienna, under the care of Dr. Matthias Brenner, one of Europe's leading oncologists. The room spun slightly. 50,000 euros. Treatment for Tomáš from a specialist we could never afford. 3 months of my life in exchange for potentially saving my brothers. Why me? I managed to ask. There must be others. There are no others, Viktor said simply. You're the daughter of Jakub Novak, which gives you perfect cover. The art world knows your father, respects his memory, and you have something else I need. He gestured to my violin. That Guarnarius. Do you know why your father told you it was valuable beyond money? I shook my head, my throat tight. Because it's not just any Guarnarius. It's the Bohemian Rose, created in 1742 for a Czech nobleman, lost to history for 200 years before your grandfather acquired it in 1956 under circumstances no one has ever fully explained. Viktor's voice was soft but intense. And it's the key to finding something I've been searching for since my father died. Something worth more than everything in this house combined. I don't understand any of this, I whispered. He stood, moving to a desk and retrieving a leather folder. He opened it on the coffee table between us, revealing photographs of documents, old letters in faded ink, drawings of instruments. In 1938, as the Nazis were ascending to power, a Jewish collector named Solomon Weiss arranged to have his most valuable possessions hidden. Not art, though he had plenty of that. Something far more precious to him. Viktor's finger traced one of the photographs. A collection of 73 rare violins, Stradivarius, Guarnerius, Amati. Instruments worth hundreds of millions today. Hidden somewhere in Prague before his family fled to England, where they all perished at sea during the crossing. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. And you think my violin is connected to this collection? I know it is. The Bohemian Rose was one of the 73. Your grandfather acquired it in 1956, just as the communist government was consolidating power. He never explained how he got it, but I suspect he found the hiding place, took one violin, and left the rest. Viktor's eyes burned with intensity. Your father spent his entire life searching for that hiding place. I believe he found clues, left them somehow, maybe even discovered the location before he died. And I believe the answer involves that violin. My father's words came back to me. This is worth more than you know, Katka. Not in money, though it's valuable enough. In what it can do, in what it carries. You think there's a clue hidden in the instrument itself, I said slowly. I think your father left you the key to a treasure worth a fortune. And I think that together, we can find it. Viktor leaned back, his expression calculated. 3 months, Kateřina. Help me navigate the social circles I need to access. Let me examine the violin. If we find the collection, I'll take 40%, you take 60%. Enough to set you and your brother up for life. It was too much, too fast. A fairy tale about lost violins and Nazi plunder, and my father's secret obsession. But the offer was real. The money was real. And Tomasz's deteriorating condition was all too real. I need time to think, I said. You have until tomorrow morning. Viktor stood, setting down his glass. Helena will show you to a room. There's a phone in the study if you need to call Prague. Check on your brother. He started to leave, then paused at the door, looking back. For what it's worth, Kateřina, I hope you'll stay. Not just because I need you, though I do, but because I think you need this too. Purpose beyond survival. A reason to play music again that isn't about earning money for treatment. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the magnificent music room, clutching my violin case, my mind a chaos of conflicting thoughts and impossible choices. Helena appeared a few minutes later, her expression professionally neutral as she led me through more corridors to a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment in Prague. A fire burned in the fireplace, and through the windows, I could see snow beginning to fall, fat flakes drifting down through the darkness. Dinner will be brought to your room if you prefer, Helena said. Or you may join Mr. Kovács in the dining room at 8. My room is fine, thank you. She nodded and withdrew, leaving me alone with my violin and my impossible decision. I called the hospital in Prague from the ornate landline on the desk. The night nurse told me Tomáš was sleeping, his fever down slightly from the morning. Stable, which was the best we could hope for these days. Tell him I called. Tell him I love him. After hanging up, I moved to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The snow was falling harder now, the gardens below disappearing under a white blanket. I thought about my father, about the countless nights I'd found him in his study poring over old documents, making notes in ledgers I wasn't allowed to see. Family research, he'd said when I asked. But maybe it had been this, the obsessive hunt for a treasure he'd never found. I opened my violin case and lifted out the instrument, examining it more closely than I had in years. The wood was pristine, the varnish glowing in the firelight. I turned it over, looking at the label inside visible through the F-hole. Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, Cremona, 1742. Below it, faded and barely visible, was another mark I'd never noticed before. I tilted the violin toward the light, squinting. 3 letters, S.W. Solomon Weiss. My heart hammered as I traced the letters with my fingertip. This violin had belonged to the Jewish collector, had been part of his precious collection. My grandfather had indeed taken it from wherever the violins were hidden. And if Viktor was right, my father had spent his life trying to find the rest. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called. Helena entered with a tray of food, setting it on a small table near the fire. Mr. Kovács thought you might be hungry. Thank you, I hesitated. Helena, how long have you worked for him? 15 years, since he was 20. What's he like? Really? She studied me for a long moment. He's demanding, brilliant, sometimes ruthless when circumstances require it. But he's also loyal to those who earn his trust, and he keeps his promises. Her expression softened slightly. His father was a hard man, very traditional. Viktor has spent years building something different, something his own. This search for the violins, it's more than greed. It's about finishing what his father started, about proving himself. Why are you telling me this? Because I see how he looks at you, and it's not the way he looks at his other associates. She moved to the door. Be careful, Miss Novakova. Viktor's world is complicated, and the people who enter it rarely leave unchanged. After she left, I ate mechanically, my mind spinning. I should refuse. I should take the 5,000 euros for tonight's performance, return to Prague, find some other way to help Tomáš. Getting involved with Viktor Kovács and his schemes could only lead to trouble. But 50,000 euros, treatment from a specialist, and if we found the violins, if they really existed, 60% of hundreds of millions. Tomáš could have every treatment available, the best care in the world. We could stop just surviving and start living. I slept fitfully. My dreams a jumble of my father's face, and Viktor's intense eyes and violins piled like firewood in dark rooms. When dawn came, grey light filtering through the windows, I knew my decision had already been made. Perhaps the moment Viktor had said those words. Purpose beyond survival. I dressed carefully in the same clothes from yesterday, brushed my hair, tried to look composed and professional. When I descended to the breakfast room Helena had described, I found Viktor already there, reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee at his elbow. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly." I poured myself coffee from a silver pot, added sugar and cream. "I have questions." "Of course. If I agree to this, what exactly would you expect from me, beyond attending events with you? Your presence at dinners, gallery openings, private viewings, light conversation, establishing our cover story that we're romantically involved. Nothing physical unless you're comfortable with it, though we'd need to be convincing." He set down his paper. "I'd also need time to examine your violin, study it for any hidden compartments or marks your father might have left. And if we don't find anything, if the violins don't exist or we can't locate them, you still get paid for 3 months of your time. Your brother still gets treatment. I keep my promises, Kateřina, regardless of outcomes." I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "What about the legal implications? If you're planning to steal, recover," he corrected. "These are pieces that were taken from their rightful owners, often through Nazi plunder or communist appropriation. I'm simply returning them to circulation through unofficial channels." His mouth curved slightly. "But if it eases your conscience, you'll have no direct involvement in the actual acquisitions. You're simply my companion, there to provide artistic credibility and distraction." "Deniability," I said. "Precisely." I thought of Tomáš, of how thin he'd looked last week, how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. I thought of the stack of medical bills on my kitchen table, the calls from collection agencies I'd stopped answering. I thought of my violin and my father's deathbed words, and the possibility that there was more to my family's history than I'd ever imagined. 3 months, I said finally, with the understanding that I can leave at any time if I feel unsafe or if the situation changes with my brother. Something like relief crossed Viktor's face. "Agreed. And I want regular updates on Tomáš's condition, unlimited calling privileges, the ability to return to Prague if he needs me." "Of course." I extended my hand across the table. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Kovács." He took my hand, his grip firm and warm. "Viktor," he corrected. "We should at least be on a first-name basis if we're supposed to be lovers." Heat crept up my neck at the word, but I held his gaze. "Viktor, then." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely compelling to genuinely handsome. "Welcome to my world, Kateřina. Try not to get lost in it." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. A doctor came to examine me, Helena explained, to ensure I was healthy enough for the demanding social schedule ahead. A tailor arrived with measuring tapes and fabric swatches, leaving with pages of numbers for the wardrobe Viktor insisted I needed. And Viktor himself spent hours with my violin, examining every inch of it with magnifying glasses and gentle fingers, making notes in a leather journal I wasn't allowed to see. Meanwhile, Tomáš was transported to Vienna in a medical van, installed in a private room at the hospital with Dr. Brenner overseeing his care. When I visited him that first afternoon, He looked so small in the vast bed, so young and vulnerable, despite being nearly as tall as I was when standing. "Katka," he said, his smile weak but genuine. "This place is like a palace." "What did you do? Rob a bank?" I kissed his forehead. "Something like that." "How are you feeling?" "Tired. But Dr. Brenner says there's a new treatment protocol he wants to try. Something with targeted therapy that's showing good results." His eyes, the same hazel as mine, searched my face. "This must be costing a fortune." "Don't worry about money. Just focus on getting better." "But how?" "I got a job," I said. "A very well-paying job. Playing violin for a private patron." It wasn't entirely a lie. Tomáš looked skeptical, but too exhausted to press further. I stayed until he fell asleep, his hand in mine, monitors beeping softly beside the bed. When I returned to the estate, I found Viktor in the music room, my violin in his hands, his expression frustrated. "Nothing," he said, without preamble. "No hidden compartments, no markings beyond the maker's label and those initials. If your father left a clue, it's not in the physical instrument." I moved closer, taking the violin from him. "Maybe it's in how it's played. A specific sequence of notes, a particular piece." "Possible, but how would we know which piece?" I thought about my father's favorite compositions, the ones he'd played until I knew them by heart. "He loved the Dvořák romance," I said slowly. "He played it constantly, said it reminded him of my mother." Viktor's eyes sharpened. "Play it. Now." I raised the violin to my shoulder, finding the opening notes of that sweet, yearning melody. It was a piece about love and loss, about memory and longing, and my father had indeed played it with special tenderness. I poured myself into it, thinking of him, of the countless times I'd heard this music drifting from his study late at night. As I played, Viktor circled me, listening intently, his head tilted as if trying to hear something beyond the notes themselves. When I finished, he shook his head. "Again, but this time, pay attention to any place where your father's interpretation differed from the standard. Any unusual phrasing, any notes he held longer or played differently." I began again, trying to channel my father's specific approach to the piece. There was one passage, I remembered, where he always lingered on a particular note, held it just a fraction longer than seemed natural. I did the same, and Viktor's hand shot up. "There, that note. What is it?" "F flat. But I don't..." "Play that section again. Listen to the sequence of notes before and after." I did, and suddenly I heard it. The notes spelled out letters. F-E flat B-E, Phoebe. Not a word, but perhaps initials. A location code. Viktor was already at his desk, pulling out maps and documents. "Phoebe, February? A street name?" He flipped through papers, his movements sharp with excitement. Then he stopped, his finger on a map of Prague's old town. "Not Phoebe, Phoebe, Iron Mountain. There's a hill in Prague, Železná Hora. The communists used it as storage in the 1950s, underground tunnels beneath an old fortress." My heart raced. "You think that's where the violins are hidden?" "It's as good a lead as we've had in 6 years." He looked at me, his expression intense. "We need to go to Prague. There's an auction at the National Gallery next week. Several pieces I've been interested in. Perfect cover for us to investigate." "Investigation meaning breaking into communist-era tunnels?" I asked dryly. "Investigation meaning researching access points and opportunities." His mouth quirked. "Though breaking in might eventually be necessary, yes." I should have been alarmed. Should have reconsidered this entire arrangement. Instead, I felt a thrill of anticipation. The first genuine excitement I'd experienced in months. "When do we leave?" 2 days. That gives us time to establish our cover story publicly." He moved closer, his eyes searching my face. "Tomorrow night, there's a charity gala at the Belvedere Palace. We'll make our debut as a couple. The art world gossips faster than any tabloid, and by the end of the evening, everyone will know Viktor Kovács has taken a young Czech violinist as his mistress." The word sent an unwelcome flutter through my stomach. And what exactly does that require? Appearing besotted with each other, dancing, touching, perhaps a strategic kiss for the photographers. His voice was carefully neutral. "Nothing you're not comfortable with, but it needs to be believable." I thought of how he'd looked at me that first night, of the way my skin prickled when he stood close. Chemistry wouldn't be the problem. Keeping it purely professional might be. I can manage that. Good. He stepped back, putting distance between us. Helena will help you prepare. The dress code is formal, black tie. I've arranged for your wardrobe to be delivered tomorrow morning. That night, lying in bed, I called Tomasz at the hospital. He sounded stronger, his voice clearer than it had been in weeks. This Dr. Brenner is amazing, Katka. He explained the whole treatment plan, showed me charts and data. I actually feel hopeful for the first time in months. Tears pricked my eyes. That's wonderful, Tomiku. I'm so glad. But seriously, who is this patron you're working for? He must be incredibly wealthy to afford all this. He's a collector, very private. I'm just lucky he appreciates my playing. Is he old? Creepy? Should I be worried about you? I thought of Viktor's intense eyes, his commanding presence, the way he moved like a predator in expensive clothes. No, not old, and I can take care of myself. That's not an answer, Tomasz said, but he was laughing, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in months. The dress arrived the next morning in a garment bag, and when I unzipped it, I nearly gasped. Midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, with a neckline that was modest from the front but plunged dramatically in the back. Helena helped me into it that evening, the fabric settling against my skin like water, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back was elegant, sophisticated, a perfect match for someone like Viktor. Helena arranged my hair in a sophisticated updo, leaving a few tendrils to frame my face, and provided jewelry that was simple but clearly expensive, diamond earrings and a delicate bracelet. Mr. Kovács will meet you at the bottom of the stairs, she said, stepping back to admire her work. You look beautiful, Miss Novakova. I descended the grand staircase carefully, the silk dress whispering with each step, my heart hammering against my ribs. Viktor waited at the bottom, devastating in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled back from his face. When he looked up and saw me, something shifted in his expression, his usual controlled facade cracking for just a moment to reveal something raw and hungry. Kateřina, he said, my name almost reverent. You look extraordinary. Heat crept up my neck. The dress is doing most of the work. The dress is merely adequate wrapping for the true treasure. He extended his hand, and when I took it, he raised my knuckles to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and somehow intimate. Shall we? The drive to the Belvedere Palace took 30 minutes through Vienna's glittering streets, the city dressed in Christmas lights and winter magic. Viktor sat beside me in the back of the Mercedes, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell his cologne. He briefed me quietly on the people we'd meet, the collectors and dealers and socialites who formed Vienna's art world elite. Ernst Kellner will be there, he said. He owns the shipping company, whose warehouses I suspect are being used to move stolen artifacts. Stay close to me when we're near him. He's dangerous in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Dangerous how? He collects information the way others collect art. Weaknesses, secrets, leverage. And he doesn't hesitate to use it. Viktor's jaw tightened. He knew my father, knew about the search for the Vice collection. If he suspects we're close to finding it, he'll do everything possible to either steal the information or eliminate us as competition. A chill ran through me despite the car's warmth. Maybe this is a mistake. If people like Kellner are involved, it's too late for doubts, Viktor said, but his voice gentled. I won't let anything happen to you, Kateřina. You have my word. The Belvedere Palace was a Baroque masterpiece, its cream and gold facade illuminated against the night sky, gardens stretching in geometric perfection. We joined a stream of elegant guests ascending the grand staircase, and I felt Viktor's hand settle at the small of my back, possessive and warm through the silk of my dress. Inside, the palace was a fantasy of frescoed ceilings and crystal chandeliers, of marble floors and gilded walls. Champagne flowed freely, and orchestra music drifted from a ballroom where couples already danced. Viktor guided me through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping occasionally to greet acquaintances, introducing me each time with the same calculated phrase, "My dear friend, Kateřina Nováková." The emphasis on dear friend sent its own message, and I saw the speculation in people's eyes, the way they reassessed Viktor and me as a unit. We paused before a painting by Egon Schiele, a twisted nude that radiated tortured beauty, and Viktor leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. Kellner is at 3 o'clock, greybeard, speaking with the woman in red. Don't look directly. I glanced casually in that direction, catching sight of a distinguished older man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Even from across the room, I felt the weight of his attention when his gaze passed over us. "He's watching us," I murmured. "Good. Let him watch." Viktor's arm slid around my waist, drawing me closer. "Laugh, as if I've said something charming." I tilted my face up to his, manufacturing a smile that felt surprisingly genuine. This close, I could see flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the precise angle of his cheekbones. "This is very strange," I said, still smiling. "Pretending to be lovers with someone you barely know." His thumb traced a small circle on my hip bone, the touch burning through fabric, or finding that the pretense comes more easily than expected. Before I could answer, a couple approached, the woman's face bright with curiosity. Viktor introduced them as collectors from Munich, and we made small talk about the charity auction, about Vienna's art scene, about my background as a violinist. The woman, Greta, seemed genuinely interested in my career, asking about my training and favorite composers. "You must play for us sometime," she said. "Viktor has always appreciated music, but I've never known him to keep company with a performer before." "Kateřina is exceptional," Viktor said, his hand still at my waist, both in her artistry and her company. The possessive note in his voice sent an unwelcome thrill through me. I reminded myself this was performance, carefully calculated to establish our cover. But when I met Viktor's eyes, the intensity I found there didn't feel entirely calculated. We circulated through the crowd for another hour, Viktor's hand never leaving my body, always touching, claiming, establishing ownership in subtle ways. A hand at my back, fingers intertwined with mine, his thumb brushing the inside of my wrist. Each touch felt like a small burn, accumulating until my skin felt hypersensitive, alive to every point of contact. "You're doing well," Viktor murmured as we paused near a window overlooking the gardens. "Very convincing." "So are you," I replied, my voice slightly breathless. His eyes darkened. "Am I? That's good to know." Before I could pass his meaning, Ernst Kellner appeared beside us, his smile pleasant but his eyes calculating. "Viktor, what a surprise to see you here. I'd heard you were avoiding Vienna this season." "Change of plans," Viktor said smoothly. "Ernst, may I present Kateřina Nováková. Kateřina, Ernst Kellner, one of Vienna's most prominent collectors." Kellner took my hand, his grip cool and assessing. "Nováková. Any relation to Jakub Novák, the violinist?" My heart skipped. "He was my father." "Ah, yes, I remember him. A talented musician, though his true passion seemed to be historical research." Kellner's smile sharpened. "He and I had some interesting conversations about missing art collections over the years. Pity about his death. So sudden. The implication hung in the air like poison." Viktor's arm tightened around my waist. "Ancient history, Ernst. Surely we have better things to discuss." "Of course." Kellner's gaze moved between us. "I was simply curious about Viktor's new companion. One likes to know who's entering one's social circle, especially someone with such interesting family connections." "Kateřina's family connections are of no concern to you," Viktor said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Kellner raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense intended. I merely find coincidences fascinating." He inclined his head to me. "Lovely to meet you, Miss Nováková. I'm sure we'll see much more of each other." He melted back into the crowd, leaving tension crackling in his wake. Viktor's jaw was tight, his body radiating controlled fury. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "But the auction isn't important. He knows something, suspects something. I need to reassess our approach." He guided me toward the exit, moving quickly, but not so quickly as to draw attention. In the car, Viktor was silent, his gaze fixed out the window at the passing city lights. I could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes, strategies forming and discarding. What did he mean about my father's death being sudden? I asked finally. Viktor's attention snapped back to me. Your father died of a heart attack, correct? Yes. He collapsed in his study. The doctors said it was unexpected but not unusual for someone with his family history. Did you ever wonder if it was truly natural? Viktor asked carefully. The question sent ice through my veins. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your father was very close to finding the Weiss collection. And I'm suggesting that certain people like Ernst Kellner, had strong motivation to prevent that discovery. Viktor's eyes held mine. I can't prove anything, Kateřina. But my father died 6 months before yours, also of a sudden heart attack, also while researching the same collection. The coincidence troubles me. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Could my father have been murdered? Had his obsession with lost violins cost him his life? Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wasn't certain you'd still agree to help if you knew the full extent of the danger. His expression was grim. And because I hoped Kellner wouldn't make the connection between you and your father so quickly. I underestimated him. So what now? Now we accelerate our timeline. We go to Prague tomorrow, not next week. We find those tunnels and search them before Kellner can mobilize his resources. Viktor leaned forward, his intensity burning. I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want out, I'll arrange safe transport back to Prague for you and your brother. Find you a new doctor. Pay you the full 50,000. No, I interrupted. If Kellner or someone like him killed my father, then I want to find what he died looking for. I want to finish what he started. Something like pride flickered in Viktor's eyes. You're certain? I'm terrified, I admitted. But yes, I'm certain. He reached across the seat, taking my hand in his. Then we'll do this together. And I promise you, Kateřina, we will find those violins. For your father, for mine, and for ourselves. The next morning, we flew to Prague in Viktor's private plane, a sleek jet that made the journey in under an hour. My apartment felt cramped and shabby after days in Viktor's estate, but it was still home, still the place where Tomáš and I had tried to build a life after our parents died. I packed carefully while Viktor examined my father's study, going through the papers and books I'd never had the heart to sort. Your father kept meticulous notes, Viktor said, his voice drifting from the small room. But they're coded, disguised as academic research on violin makers and historical provenance. I joined him, looking over his shoulder at my father's familiar handwriting. Seeing it again after 7 years brought a lump to my throat. Can you decipher it? Some of it. He references Železná hora multiple times, always in connection with the year 1956. And look here, Viktor pointed to a margin note. A list of measurements, 3.2 meters, 1.7 meters, 185 meters. These could be dimensions for something, perhaps the size of the hiding place. I studied the numbers, my mind working. Or distances, from a reference point? Possible. Viktor photographed several pages with his phone. We'll need to visit the site, explore the tunnels. I have a contact in Prague who can provide access. Someone who worked in the fortress during the communist era. When? Tonight, after dark. He looked up at me. Are you ready for this? I thought of my father bent over these same papers, chasing the same mystery. Yes, I said. I'm ready. We spent the afternoon at the hospital visiting Tomáš, who looked healthier than I'd seen him in months. The new treatment was working, Dr. Brenner reported via phone, the cancer markers in his blood dropping significantly. I held my brother's hand, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, and the complicated knowledge that Viktor's money was saving his life. You look different, Katka, Tomáš said, studying my face. Happier, maybe, or just less tired. I am less tired. Things are looking up. This patron of yours, he must really value your playing. Tomáš's eyes were too knowing for 19. Or is it more than that? It's complicated, I said, which was perhaps the most honest answer I could give. That evening, Viktor picked me up in a nondescript car, not the Mercedes. He wore dark clothes, practical boots, and looked more like a thief than a wealthy collector, which, I supposed, was exactly what he was tonight. He handed me similar clothes, and I changed in my bedroom while he waited, emerging in black jeans, a dark sweater, and sturdy shoes. "Perfect," he said. "Ready?" We drove to Jelezna Hora as night fell, the hill rising on Prague's eastern outskirts, crowned with the remains of a 19th century fortress. Viktor parked on a side street, and we walked the rest of the way, our breath clouding in the December cold. A man waited near a service entrance, older, with a weathered face and cautious eyes. "This is Milos," Viktor said in Czech. "He worked here as a guard during the Soviet era. Milos, this is Kateřina." Milos nodded to me, then produced a keyring heavy with old-fashioned keys. "The tunnels haven't been used in decades," he said. "Most people have forgotten they exist, but in the 50s, we stored all kinds of things down there. Art, documents, weapons, things the government wanted hidden." He led us through the service entrance, down stone steps that descended into darkness. Viktor produced powerful flashlights, and we continued deeper, the air growing colder and staler with each step. The tunnels were extensive, branching in multiple directions, the walls rough-hewn rock that glistened with moisture. "Where would they have stored confiscated items?" Viktor asked. "Things taken from private citizens?" Milos considered. "Section D, probably. That's where the personal property went, the things that weren't important enough to catalogue officially." We followed him through a maze of passages, my sense of direction completely lost. Finally, we emerged into a larger chamber, perhaps 20 meters across, with metal shelving lining the walls. Most of the shelves were empty, but some still held boxes, crates, items wrapped in deteriorating cloth. "This is it," Milos said. "I'll wait at the entrance. You have 2 hours before the security patrol passes." After he left, Viktor and I began searching systematically, opening boxes, examining crates. Most contained mundane items, documents and books, and household goods. But in the back corner, behind a stack of empty shelves, Viktor found something that made him freeze. "Kateřina, look at this!" I moved to his side, following his flashlight beam. On the wall, barely visible beneath decades of grime, was a marking. A rose, carved or painted, no larger than my palm. Below it, initials, J.N. Jakub Novak. My father had been here. Viktor's fingers traced the marking reverently. The Bohemian Rose. The violin's name. This has to be it. We began examining the wall more carefully, looking for any sign of a hidden compartment or entrance. The dimensions from my father's notes. Viktor suggested we measure from the rose marking. 3.2 meters to the left, 1.7 meters up, 85 meters deep. I counted out the distances while Viktor marked them with chalk. The final point landed on what looked like solid wall, but when Viktor pressed against it, something shifted. A section of the wall, perhaps a meter square, moved inward slightly, revealing it was actually a concealed door. "Help me," Viktor said, and together we pushed. The door resisted, rusted hinges protesting, but finally swung inward with a groan that echoed through the chamber. Beyond was a smaller room, maybe 3 meters square, and my breath caught. Lining the walls, standing in neat rows, were violin cases. Dozens of them, covered in dust and cobwebs, but unmistakably shaped for instruments. Viktor's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. We found them. We entered slowly, reverently, as if the cases might disappear if we moved too quickly. Viktor opened the nearest one with careful hands, and there, nestled in decaying velvet, was a violin. The label inside read, Antonius Stradivarius, Cremona, 1715. "It's real," I whispered. "They're all real." We opened case after case, each revealing another masterpiece. Guarnerius, Amati, Bergonzi, Stradivarius, the greatest violin makers in history, represented in this lost collection. Some were in remarkable condition despite the decades underground. Others showed damage from humidity and temperature fluctuations, but even damaged, they were priceless. 73 violins, Viktor said, doing a quick count, worth conservatively 500 million euros. More if they can be properly restored and sold at auction. I stared at the instruments, overwhelmed. This was what my father had died seeking, what had driven him for years. what had consumed his thoughts and time. And we'd found it finally, in a forgotten room beneath an old fortress. "We can't move them all tonight," Viktor said, already thinking practically. "We'll need trucks, proper storage, climate-controlled transport." He pulled out his phone, beginning to make calls. I moved through the cases, examining each instrument, and in the back corner found the mate to my own violin. Another Guarnerius from 1742, nearly identical to the Bohemian Rose. I opened the case carefully, and there, tucked beneath the violin, was an envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting, dated 1 week before he died. "My dear Kateřina," it began. "If you're reading this, then you found what I could not. I'm proud of you, though I wish I could have completed this search myself. The violin I gave you is the key, as I'm sure you've discovered. But there's something else you should know. The Weiss collection doesn't belong to whoever finds it. It belongs to the Weiss family, the descendants of Solomon Weiss, who was never able to reclaim it. I've included information here about his granddaughter Rachel, who lives in London. Please, when you find these instruments, ensure they reach their rightful owner. The money doesn't matter. Justice does. I love you always, your father." Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Of course, my father would have wanted justice, not profit. He'd been searching not to claim the treasure, but to return it. I showed the letter to Viktor, watching his face as he read. His expression was unreadable, but I saw the conflict in his eyes. "What will you do?" I asked. "What do you want me to do?" "The right thing," I said firmly. "Contact Rachel Weiss. Return the collection to her." Viktor was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving across the instruments. "Do you know what you're asking? This collection is worth a fortune. Your share would be 300 million euros, enough to secure your future, your brother's future, for generations. I know exactly what I'm asking, and I know it's what my father would have wanted." I met his eyes. "You can keep your 50,000 for the 3 months, but the violins go to their rightful owner." Something shifted in Viktor's expression, something that looked almost like awe. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "Truly remarkable. Does that mean you'll do it?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. We'll contact Rachel Weiss. We'll arrange for the collection to be returned to her." A wry smile touched his lips. "My father would be furious with me. He wanted this collection for the prestige, for the proof that he could find what others couldn't. But I think I prefer your father's approach." Relief washed through me, followed by something warmer, deeper. I moved to Viktor, rising on my toes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you." His arms came around me, holding me close in the dusty room surrounded by priceless instruments. "No, thank you, for reminding me that some things matter more than acquisition." We heard footsteps then, multiple people descending into the tunnels. Viktor tensed, his hand going to the small of his back, where I now realized he'd concealed a weapon. "That's not Miloš," he said quietly. Ernst Kellner's voice echoed through the chamber. "No, it's not. Your contact was very helpful once properly motivated. Viktor, Kateřina, please come out. We have much to discuss." Viktor's jaw clenched. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick message to someone, then pocketed it. "Stay behind me," he murmured, moving toward the hidden door. We emerged to find Kellner flanked by 4 men, all armed, all professional. Kellner smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I must thank you both for doing the hard work of locating the collection. I've been searching for years, but I lacked the key piece. That violin of yours was essential, wasn't it, Kateřina? You killed my father," I said, anger overriding fear. "An unfortunate necessity. He refused to share information, refused to partner with me. I gave him every opportunity to be reasonable." Kellner's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I hope you'll be wiser." "And if we refuse?" Viktor asked, his voice deadly calm. "Then I'll simply take what I want. The collection will disappear into private hands, sold piece by piece to collectors who don't ask questions. And you?" Kellner's smile sharpened. "Well, accidents happen in these old tunnels, cave-ins, tragic falls. The authorities would be very sympathetic. You won't get away with this," I said. "My dear girl, I already have." Kellner gestured to his men. "Start moving the instruments to the truck. Carefully, they're fragile. As the men moved toward the hidden room, Viktor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I caught the ghost of a smile. Actually, Ernst, I don't think you will. The sound of footsteps came from multiple directions, and suddenly the chamber was full of people. Police, I realized, at least a dozen officers with weapons drawn. And among them, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair, dressed elegantly despite the underground setting. "That's far enough, Mr. Kellner," she said in English accented with British polish. "These instruments belong to my family, and I've come to claim them." Kellner's face went white. "Who are you?" "Rachel Weiss. Solomon Weiss was my grandfather." She looked at Viktor and me. "Mr. Kovács contacted me yesterday, told me what you'd found. I took the liberty of bringing Czech authorities and my solicitor. I believe everything is in order for the collection to be returned to its rightful owner." The next hour was chaos. Kellner was arrested, along with his men, on charges ranging from trespassing to attempted theft to threats of violence. Viktor and I gave statements to the police, explaining how we'd located the collection using my father's research. Rachel Weiss examined the instruments with tears streaming down her face, running her fingers over cases that had belonged to her grandfather. "Thank you," she said to me, taking my hands in hers. "Thank you for finding them, and thank you for doing the right thing. Your father would be proud." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I just nodded. As the violins were carefully removed for transport to a climate-controlled facility, Viktor drew me aside. "There's something I need to tell you." I looked up at him, exhausted and emotional, and still riding the adrenaline of the past hours. "What?" "When I first investigated you, when I learned about your father and the violin, my intentions weren't entirely pure. I wanted the collection for myself, for the prestige and the profit. You were a means to an end." His eyes held mine. "But somewhere along the way that changed. You changed me, made me remember that some things matter more than acquisition." "Viktor, let me finish." He took my hands, his grip warm and steady. "I told Rachel about the collection, not just because it was right, but because I want you to see me as someone worthy of you. Someone who can make the right choice, even when it costs him a fortune." My heart hammered against my ribs. "And what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement between us, this pretense of being lovers, has become very real for me. I'm saying that somewhere between the Belvedere Palace and this dusty tunnel, I fell in love with you." He raised a hand to cup my cheek. "I'm saying I want you to stay, not for 3 months, not as an employee, but as my partner in every sense of the word." I should have been cautious. Should have reminded myself that I barely knew him, that his world was dangerous and complicated. But standing there in that underground chamber, where my father's obsession had finally borne fruit, looking into Viktor's eyes and seeing genuine vulnerability, I found I didn't want to be cautious. "I'm saying yes," I whispered, "to all of it." When he kissed me, it was nothing like that brief kiss in his study. This was deep and claiming and full of promise. His hands tangling in my hair, my body pressing against his. It was a kiss that said this was just the beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the Musikverein concert hall in Vienna, my violin raised, preparing for my comeback performance. The hall was full, every seat taken, the audience rustling with anticipation. In the front row sat Tomáš, healthy and strong, his cancer in remission after the successful treatment. Beside him was Rachel Weiss, who had become a dear friend and mentor. And next to her, Viktor, his eyes locked on me with that same intensity I'd first seen in his music room. The collection had been authenticated, celebrated, and partially sold to fund Rachel's charitable foundation, supporting Holocaust education and reparations. Several instruments, including my Bohemian Rose and its twin, had been donated to museums. The story of their recovery had made international news, though Viktor and I had remained carefully out of the spotlight, letting Rachel have the recognition she deserved. Ernst Kellner was in prison, facing decades of charges related to art theft and murder. Investigation into my father's death had been reopened, and while we might never have absolute proof, the evidence strongly suggested Kellner's involvement. Justice at last, if incomplete. I'd moved to Vienna officially, My belongings merged with Viktor's in the beautiful estate where we'd first met. I still taught music, still performed when opportunities arose. But now I also helped Viktor with his legitimate collecting, using my expertise to authenticate acquisitions and build his reputation as a fair and ethical collector. As I drew my bow across the strings, beginning the Dvořák romance that had been my father's favorite, I felt his presence in the music, felt his pride and love surrounding me like a warm cloak. And when I reached that particular phrase, that sequence of notes that had led us to the hidden chamber, I held the E-flat just a fraction longer than necessary, my own small tribute to the man who had started this journey. The piece ended to thunderous applause, and I took my bows with tears in my eyes. As I left the stage, Viktor was waiting in the wings, pulling me into his arms, kissing me with a possessiveness that still sent thrills through me after all these months. "You were magnificent," he murmured against my lips. "We were magnificent," I corrected. Together, because that was what we were now, what we'd built from that strange beginning in his music room, partners in music and life and the ongoing adventure of building something meaningful. He still dealt in art, though now strictly through legal channels. I still played my violin, though now for joy as much as necessity. And Tomáš was healthy, finishing his final year of secondary school and planning to study medicine. It had started with a desperate need for money, with a phone call accepting an offer I barely understood. It had continued through danger and deception, through hidden tunnels and lost treasures. But it had become something neither of us expected, something real and lasting and true. That night, lying in bed in Viktor's arms, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, about my father's obsession that had seemed pointless, but had actually been noble, about Viktor's careful walls that had crumbled to reveal a good man underneath the ruthless collector, about my own strength discovered in crisis that had allowed me to demand justice over profit. "What are you thinking about?" Viktor asked, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "About my father, about how he'd approve of all this, of us." Viktor pressed a kiss to my temple. I wish I could have met him, thanked him for creating such an extraordinary daughter. He would have liked you, eventually. I smiled in the darkness. After he was done threatening you for looking at me inappropriately. Viktor's laugh rumbled through his chest. "Fair enough. Though I think my intentions toward you have been entirely appropriate, if perhaps a bit obsessive." "Obsessive?" I turned to face him. "You're obsessed with me?" "Completely." His eyes, they were serious, despite his light tone. "From the moment I saw you in that music room, violin in hand, eyes closed in concentration, you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and I've seen a lot of beautiful things. That was just attraction," I said. "It started as attraction," he agreed. "But it became love somewhere between the Belvedere Palace and the tunnels, watching you choose justice over wealth, watching you fight for what was right, even when it cost you everything. How could I not fall in love with that?" I kissed him then, pouring everything I felt into it. Love and gratitude and hope, and the bone-deep knowledge that this was where I belonged. Not in the safety of my old life, not in the comfortable mediocrity I'd been settling for, but here, in the arms of a complicated, dangerous, wonderful man who looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his collection. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "I love you," he replied, always and completely. Outside our window, Vienna glittered in the night, the city where my life had transformed, where I'd come seeking money and found purpose, where I'd expected temporary employment and discovered permanent belonging, where a desperate violinist had met a ruthless collector, and somehow, impossibly, they'd built something beautiful. My father's violin rested in its case across the room, the bohemian rose that had been the key to everything. Tomorrow I would play it again, would draw music from its ancient wood and remember where it had led me. But tonight, I was content to lie in Viktor's arms and marvel at how a single phone call, a single desperate decision, had changed everything. Tomáš was healthy, the vice collection had been returned to its rightful heir. Justice had been served, at least partially, and I had found love in the last place I'd expected, with a man who'd started as my employer and become my partner in every sense of the word. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined as a girl. It was better, more real, earned through danger and choice, and the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. And as I drifted towards sleep, Viktor's heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning, that whatever came next, whatever adventures or challenges awaited, we would face them together. The bitter December wind that had cut through my coat that first day in Vienna seemed like a lifetime ago. That frightened, desperate girl who'd stood outside the Café Central, waiting for an offer she didn't fully understand, felt like a stranger. I'd been transformed by the journey, strengthened by the choices I'd made, opened by the love I'd found. And somewhere, I like to think, my father was smiling. His obsession had borne fruit at last, not in the way he'd intended, but in ways more valuable than any lost collection. He'd given me the key to a treasure, but the real treasure hadn't been violins worth millions. It had been the journey itself, the people I'd met, the love I'd discovered, the strength I'd found. The Bohemian Rose had led me home, but home wasn't a place. It was Viktor's arms around me, his breath warm against my hair, his whispered promises in the darkness. It was Tomasz's laughter, healthy and strong. It was Rachel's friendship, and the knowledge that I'd honored my father's final wish. It was the music I created and the life I'd built from the ashes of desperation. As sleep claimed me, I heard my father's voice one last time, not sad or distant, but warm with approval. "Well done, Katka, well done." And in Viktor's arms, in our home in Vienna, with all the promise of tomorrow stretching before us, I finally, completely, let myself believe it.